Welcome back to the Mid-Year Mitch YouTube channel. In today's episode, I'm going to show you how I installed this wide-body C2 front end on the Tribute Split, so be sure to stick around. In the last video you saw, I installed the smooth firewall kit from Dynamic Corvettes, and now it's time for the fun stuff. There's only really one big part of the car that's missing, and that's the front end. So we have a wide front end sitting up here. I think it's an inch or an inch and a half wider than stock. We also have the 63 gills, and we have over here their custom inner fenders, which are designed to be a little more smooth than the factory ones. You kind of have to cut them for your chassis, which is perfect because this is an aftermarket chassis. And then we also have some other closeout panels that go off the inner fenders. So this is all part of a kit that the smooth firewall came with. So now we have to take all the clamps off, get that front end on there, and figure out, how all this stuff works, what trimming we have to do, get this stuff to fit. And we also have their 67 Stinger hood. So this is going to take a little bit of fiddling to get everything how we like it, get it set up nice. But if we take our time and get everything set up, we should end up with a nice product. So I'm test fitting the front end for the first time. This is my first time also using one of these front ends. So I wanted to get it on here, see how it fits. And I'm using my favorite thing to support the front end, which is the chain hoist. It's actually a really great tool to hold the front of the front end because you can adjust it in very fine increments to get it to look, get the body line to look right. So I have an old battery clamp here holding a string across the door line, and this clamp's just kind of resting on it, but I was holding it to about here, and this is about where the front end body line starts to dip down, which is what we want. So from pretty much here, the whole way back, it's level and it looks good. So I think this is a pretty decent height for this side. We're looking pretty good. And I can see this side, well, we're sitting up here a little bit, so I have to wrestle around with this side. I definitely recommend if you're installing a front end to do some test fits without the inner fenders here because it's a lot easier to climb in here and see where you're hitting. One change that Dynamic made to make your engine compartment look a little cleaner is that they have this little flat spot here where the hood would rest, and then it comes down to a 90 right here. So this piece wasn't here originally. This must be just to clean it up and to make it look nicer. Originally, you just would have had two flat pieces. This flat on this flat sandwiched together. They came in here with a grinder and smoothed it up, and you could actually see the grind marks going across that flange. So they smoothed it up a good bit. So what that means for us is that we have to get everything perfectly shaven down behind here because that flange is going to hit something, which I believe it is. I believe that's one reason why it's not going back all the way, and that could be one reason why it's not going over far enough. So we probably have to make some marks. Have to trim the fiberglass. Dynamic Corvette has a little bit different approach to how this front end seams together than an original press molded front end would seam. Originally, there was a seam right, pretty much, if that line was straight, pretty much right through there where this part was separate. This part was attached to this. This was all the hood surround. It went the whole way around the front end. And then there were these little side panels that went on. So they moved the seam from here up to here, and there's a bonding strip that's about this wide up here. So if we go underneath here to the driver's side plenum and look up, you can see that little light fiberglass where I have a clamp. That's the bonding strip, and you can see it's interfering back here on the plenum, and that's part of the reason why this front end won't wrap far enough, because they added that little bonding strip there. There's some extra thickness that wasn't originally accounted for. So we need to make a relief cut in the firewall there, so that way this bonding strip can actually fall into the place it's supposed to. That'll allow the whole front end to drop down, and that'll allow this side to wrap and to line up with these gills better. So I pulled the front end on and off several times to grind the underside of the front end, to trim up the firewall, and to get these side panels to fit a little better. So far I'm pretty happy with the way it's lining up. I still have all the gaps really tight because you don't know if things are going to move in or out. I like to leave them tight. But I whittled this door opening down a little bit, and the hinge pillar is not installed, so I can still push this in. You can see I still have some more trimming to do, but we're really close with the body line here. Once I trim that, that'll suck right in. And this is all lining up. And I have a clamp here just to make sure it's level. Right now, I'm measuring from here down to the floor on both sides to make sure that we're level, we're not crooked or anything, just because I have it suspended from a central point. And overall, things are turning out nice. I had to remove a little bit of the bonding strips in this area right here, just because they were too high and that was pushing the front end up, which was making this higher than this, and that it was also causing this gap to be wider, and that was also causing this side to be real high. So I took that out, and that let this whole thing kind of settle down on this side. And you can see now I have to do a little bit of trimming here, shorten this panel up to let the door kind of fit in here. So after I trim that up, this gap will close up a little bit and the body line will fit up. But that's just kind of what it looks like before. The other side's a little more of the after situation. But I had to do a good bit of trimming on the firewall in this area, so that way this lip would fall over and fit nice. But I just have the whole thing pushed as far back as it'll go, and I'm clamping it in the center, and it just kind of naturally falls into the body lines of the doors. So far all of that stuff is lining up nice. My advice if you're doing one of these is to first work on fitting the top section, and then bring these side gills in just to help you with your height. But you can check from this to the floor to make sure you're level, check your body line, and first focus on getting this piece to fit. Then once you're pretty happy with that, start to bring these side gills up to that same point. And then after I do that, I'm gonna work on getting these inner fenders to fit. So these are Dynamics custom, I don't know what the technical term is, but they're basically a blank inner fender. They're designed for their kit that has a block-off plate over here to cover some of the wasted open space here. So that'll help smooth up the inner, the engine compartment. But these ones don't have a hole cut out in them for the control arms. Originally they had one that was something like that. So we need to cut holes in these before we can even really get these mocked up in here. So I'm gonna start off by making a small hole somewhere, slowly refine it so we can get these inner fenders to fit in here. So I trimmed up the driver gills, then I pulled the front end off. I roughly installed the core support about where it's going to sit, and I wanted to work on getting the inner fenders to fit. So it's hard to get the inner fenders in here with the front end on, so I had to pull that off. And these ones are blank, like I said. You have to cut a hole in here for your control arm and your suspension. Now this hole is still small. I think it still needs to come up higher. But I'm just keeping it as small as possible, and at least I can get the front end on there somewhat. So now I want to work on getting these inner fenders to fit inside of this nose, which typically this is a really easy job on a stock front end. All you have to do is scuff everything, just kind of come through here, mark everywhere where you need to clean and prep it, put glue on it, clamp it in place, and you're done. But this one's a little different because this is a wide front end, and this is a mostly stock style. It's all the stock exterior dimensions of a C2 inner fender. You can start to see in here, there's a bit of a gap. I can get my finger in here. There's a big gap down here. I really can't get my hand down in there. So Dynamic sells this little thing which looks kind of like an elephant ear. It is a filler piece to go in there, and they also have one for back here which will fit somewhere in here. So if we go over to the other side, I have this elephant ear sitting in here, and you can see the gap is a lot tighter just needs to be moved. The gap is a lot tighter in here, so that's how that's supposed to fit. So it looks like he gave us a nice little step in here. So what I'm gonna do is overlay this guy, and you can see the dimensional differences. What we need to do is kind of trace a line across here and measure up, which this is probably an inch flange, measure up an inch and cut there. Or we can cut on this radius right through here up to here, and then we'll just measure for the straight shot, make sure we cut that right. So we'll just cut that whole piece off. He said you can kind of scab a little piece in or do whatever you think you need to. I think it's easier and probably cleaner to bodywork just to do this whole piece. So I'm gonna get that guy cut out and marked. Then we need to do the same thing with the back, which it looks like, yeah, if you just set it here, you can see how much it's different dimensionally. So I think we'll just lay it roughly how it lays on top of it. You can see it pokes out a lot more. I think it fits about like that. So I'll probably clamp this guy in place. We'll trace it and we'll measure up because we want to make sure we have a bonding flange that is, we want to make sure we have a bonding flange left on this, which will fill this spot here. This will be the old inner fender sitting here, the new inner fender, and then all you have to do is body work, just this little ridge here. So we'll go ahead and mark both these and cut both of these. So I cut both the front and the back of this inner fender, and I've been whittling away slowly to make sure these two fit up pretty nice, as well as these guys. I've been doing some work off camera just to get it to line up, but I started off like you saw. I made that initial cut, then I set this piece in place and saw kind of where it needed to live, and I just kept remarking this inner fender and measuring. The back is 7/10 of an inch, the front flange is an inch. So that way I could get it to line up about like that, where we have a pretty nice gap the whole way. I'll work on this one more whenever we're on the gills, but I'm mainly interested in this one. I had to focus on the bottom a little bit to make sure that there was a good gap here before I glue the inner fender in. And down here you can see this guy, well, you might be able to see, it's pretty nice and tight. There's a little bit of a gap right here, which I think I can kind of tweak this around a little bit. I still have maybe one more round of trimming to do on this just to try to get this to relax. But now I think it's time to pull this out and grind all of our mating surfaces. I think we're about ready to glue in this inner fender. I removed both the passenger and driver door so I can install the door jamb fiberglass here, and this is the original fiberglass that went to this pillar, and same with the one on the driver's side. So that makes this a little easier to install these because they were already cut out together. The most important thing with this is to make sure that the fiberglass hole for the door hinge and the steel hole for the door hinge line up. If this is shifted up too far, that means the whole front end will want to be shifted up. So that's really important. I try to get these exactly where they were or a little bit lower. Some of the reproduction ones, you have to fight a little bit more. So I have both of these guys secured, and now I need to come through here with the grinder and rough all this old bonding adhesive up and get to some good fiberglass so we can start to mock the front end up with these in place. That'll give us a better idea of what we're looking at. So now I'm going to get the doors put on, and we can start figuring out how much we need to remove. And since the front end is sitting here drying, I have the inner fenders glued in just from here forward. I left from here back open in case we need to manipulate it a little bit to get the hood gap to look really nice and level. So I can't do anything with this front end at this moment. So what I'm going to do is put the doors on and just take a piece of fiberglass, a scrap piece that's about the same thickness as the front end, and lay it on here in different spots up whenever the door is installed. And that'll tell me roughly, is this too high or too low? This will represent the front end, and this will be a quick gauge that I can move around. That'll be a lot easier than putting the front end on and off and on and off and on and off. So I can at least start to get it close, then we'll introduce the front end, and then we'll see what we actually have to manipulate. Originally, this little divot here was where a bonding strip came in, where the separate panel down here was for the gills, and then up here was the hood surround. This bonding strip went the whole way to the front of the car. On the Dynamic, they shifted their part line from right here to somewhere up here. So I'm gonna have to see if we need to remove a little bit of their bonding strip because there's not an indent up here. I have both doors mounted up with the hinge pillars in place, and I set the front end on after I glued the front of the inner fenders in just to do a mock-up to see kind of what we're looking at here. So the nice thing about having this cut line in this front end right here is you have a nice spot to put a clamp. Now you can see there's some stuff that's overlapping, so we have to do a little bit of trimming in this department, and I know once this will sink in here, it'll be a little low. So we have to bring that bonding strip up a little bit, and we can see that this is high. This is basically a material thickness high, which is where that bonding strip is right here, which is what I was kind of worried about. That guy is a little too high. So I think what we're going to do, is because the other side has the same problem, is cut this part of the bonding strip off right through here. I'll keep it nice and tight so it's close to this, but that way this panel will sink further into this because there's really not enough of this hinge pillar to cut away. So I'm going to carefully trace a line in here. We're going to cut this bonding strip out, and that will push this panel in, which will help make these body lines line up. So I cut out the little chunk of bonding strip that was right here, and then I also trimmed away the door opening a little bit. You can see we have a nice flush fit pretty much the whole way back through here, and now we don't have a double thickness issue here. We have a nice transition. We're looking good. Now you can see that this hinge pillar bonding strip is at the same exact height as this bonding strip, so we don't have like a triple thickness going on there. So that looks really good. But now the issue is we have a little bit of a gap in here between these two, which that's okay. The panel can bridge that gap, but the gap right up here is a little bit concerning because that's where the glue trail will be. So there will only be a little bit of glue in there, and that could cause a crack or something could show up there. So what I'm gonna do is take that little chunk that I removed, I'm going to scuff this up, scuff the underside of this panel up, and I'm going to slip this underneath and glue it underneath here. So then I have a backer between these bonding, so I have a bonding strip for the bonding strip, and that will give us something to build material off of. It'll help make it stronger. This will be a nice solid joint in here, and that'll also prevent a little like pinhole or something appearing there. And then all that can be body worked over and it'll be just fine. So now I need to work on getting this installed first, because that needs to be nice and solid clamped up. So that'll give us something to bite onto to hold this down. So I'm pretty happy. I lost my clamping. I'm pretty happy with the way that fits. It's just a tackle high right here. So we're gonna have to address that. I need to make a little bonding strip for this area right in here. And this side I have the bonding strip clamped in, and it just needs a little bit of manipulation. We're really close to getting this to fit almost perfect. Just has to go a little bit that way. So I think I need to do some sanding here. Again, I need to put a bonding strip in there. That'll bring that up. It might just be a little bit low right here, but we're in a pretty good spot. So I spent a lot more time than I thought I would trying to refine this and get this gap pretty much as perfect as I can. And, well, there's just a little bit of flashing here, but basically, I mean, she's perfect. It's basically there. You might be able to get your fingernail under one side or the other, but we're looking good. The body line lines up beautiful. And I have all my clamps, except for the ones that go in this little area here, mocked up, just to make sure I'm happy with the location. And again, I have my little prop here, keeping this side up. I've measured from here, the point on the other side, this point here, and this side to make sure it's level. And I'm not just winging it. Whenever I started the project off, I put the side panels, which are laying over here, on. I took some measurements, made sure the body line was straight, and I was happy with it. So I know that's where this has to live. But because I have clamps there, I can't put those panels on. So I made my measurements, I checked everything, and I'm just rechecking my measurements. I actually have them written down here for what I need. So, I mean, look at this. This is probably the nicest one that I've done so far. I mean, this is just butter. You can go over this with the DA and you can almost make that perfect. So I'm really happy with the way that turned out. Now it's time to pull the front end up a little bit. Let's clean everything real well, and then we'll get the glue out. We'll start pumping glue everywhere. Last night I got the main part of the front end glued on. I let this thing cure up and it turned out really nice. And I did open the doors and let it cure with the doors open so we don't glue the doors shut. But I got everything kind of smoothed out. I spent some time last night after I turned the camera off smoothing out all these joints, checking everything, making sure I got glue in all the places I need to. And I kept checking my measurements just to make sure nothing shifted and that I'm happy with the way everything was laying out. And I mean, this is probably one of the best ones that we've done. The glue's definitely cured up, so I can take these clamps off and start working on the gills. So I test fit the gill on this side, and it fits up pretty nice with the car front to back. Now it's time to work on building this area out, which it told me what I thought it would, is that this area is too low. And this little tool is nice because you can just run this tool along here and you can figure out where you need to add. So right here, I know from putting the fender on, but also from this tool that we have an edge here. So this needs to come up just a little bit in here so we get a nice fit. So overall, it looks nice and tight in here. But then from here down is where it gets wider. This is where another bonding strip lives. So I know that we had to fill this area in regardless. I applied some filler and brought this pillar out. I ground it down so that way these two fit up really nice. It's like 99% perfect, I would say. Just a little bit of sanding, bodywork, this thing will come right around. And I'm really happy with the way that fits up. In the front, oh, I forgot to sand this. I'll sand this part, but other than that, this panel's ready to glue on. I'm doing my final clamp check. Like I always say, I like to do this before we get any glue out, make sure that we have everything situated properly. And I clamped the front down. That was pretty easy. The back's hard to get to because you can't put any clamps through these gills. You really can't sneak clamps back through this way. I guess you could in some places. Maybe I'll try that for over here. But from here over is a little bit challenging, especially in the firewall area. So I got my quarter panel / front end installer jig set up over here, and I have it put to use. I'm pushing down on the front end, and this one little spot here just needs a little bit of pressure. I'll probably have to open the door up and try to get a clamp in here just to hold that little guy. But this dude's working overtime, and I'm using clamps in interesting ways, like clamping a clamp to the fixture, and I also have one down here. I just need a little bit of pressure right on this body line, and that just helped everything lay out. I have a couple clamps down here to the bird cage, and I have a clamp holding a block of wood, holding a clamp to the gill. So we have some interesting clamp situations here, but it's working. I'm gonna work on attaching the inner fender to this later, but first, let's get this piece installed. So I have the passenger side fender glued on here, and I'm happy with the way it turned out. I went a little heavy on the glue, but I had enough to fill the whole seam the whole way across, so that turned out really nice. All the clamps laid out just the way they should. My jig is working the way it's supposed to. I'm really happy with the way that turned out. It was pretty easy. It just took a lot of trimming to get this guy to fit up. On the end, it was a little long, had to bring that in. Other than that, though, this piece was pretty straightforward to install. If you don't have a fixture like this to install this piece, you might want to consider building something like this or modifying some clamps or doing something kind of crazy. If you had a single car garage you're doing this in, you could definitely put clamps off of the wall. I think that's how Paragon used to do it back in the day, but there's definitely plenty of options to do something like this. But we didn't use any screws, so Steve would be proud of us. And that's where we're going to end this video off here. We had a little hang up on the driver's side, but we'll get straightened out next week. So this side is going to have to wait. I'm going to let this guy cure up, and then we can keep on trucking forward on getting the inner fender figured out on that side. And then we can work on getting the inner fender extension that goes over to the firewall figured out and installed. We still have to install the top of the inner fender to the fender top, and then get the hood mounted. Then I have some finish work, some sanding, some cleaning on this car, and then this thing's actually heading home a week from today. So we still have quite a bit to wrap up. We're nearing the home stretch. Once we get this side on and the hood on, it's going to look like it's ready to go. But like I said, there's still some work to do ahead of this. And I think the owner is going to be pretty happy with this car. It's obviously going to need a lot of finish work, a lot of sanding, but it's got a really good foundation, good gaps, really good quality parts. He's gonna have to do some fiberglass repairs here in there, a little bit of filler, so a lot of sanding, but I think it'll be a nice car when it's done. But in just a couple months, it really looks like a car. I can't wait to take all these clamps off and get the fixture out of here, close the door, roll this thing outside, and see what it looks like. So that'll be in next week's video. Next week, we'll get all these little details finished up, put some wheels on it, and roll it outside. I also have another hub for this thing so we can get this thing rolling there. We're still back ordered one control arm, so we got a used one here we'll put on the back, so now we can actually get this thing on the ground and roll it outside. Overall, I'm pretty impressed with the way this front end installed. It took some fitting, trimming, and it took some figuring out to get these inner fenders to fit with the front end because you had to splice some pieces in. But I think the steps in this procedure that I took are pretty good. I think if you followed these steps, you'd be in pretty good shape as well. I think overall, if you get this top piece fitting, you kind of slowly mock the side gills in, sneak up on it, then you get the inner fenders to fit, glue the front of them in, then glue the top on. Then once that's fully secure, you can really narrow down how these side gills go, and then you can work on the back of the inner fenders and getting the hood to fit right. I think if you try to do everything at once or in a different set of steps, you may get hung up on stuff. I'm sure there's more than one way to do this, but this is the way that made sense in my head. But that's going to do it for this video. If you enjoyed, please give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe. We have a lot of work to do left on this car in about a week, so I got a lot of work to do, and I'll catch you guys later.